It all started with an ad in LA paper, Recycler was the name, in 1981. Drummer looking for other metal musicians to jam with. 37 years later, they still sell out all stadiums they're playing all over the world. Just a month ago, they were here at the Globe Arena and they made a record twice. They played 2 nights. So they broke the first one the first night and their own the second night. Please welcome the Metallica co-founder Lars Ulrich and the journalist Janne Gradvall on stage.
God dag.
Välkommen Lars.
Tak.
Tack.
Tak. Skal vi gøre det hele på dansk og svensk?
I know, I think we'll do it in English.
We'll do it in English. Okay.
And I think
the easy way.
We will do that just as you grew up. At least my friends were just listening to music all the time. And I know we're born in the same year, 1963. So I thought we could just play music and talk about music.
Let's just play music. Yeah. Can we go sit out there?
Maybe, okay. After a while, if you feel comfortable.
Great.
So the first track.
That's not heavy metal.
This was obviously not Master of Puppets.
You can't turn Miles Davis on just like that. That is obviously not Master of Puppets.
No. But can you introduce the music we just heard?
Well, that is Miles Davis, as I hope most of you would know, from the album Kind of Blue, which is, I think, considered probably the greatest jazz record ever made if you're going to break it into that kind of definitive accolade. But you know, I grew up in a household full of a lot of jazz music, and my father wrote about jazz music for Danish newspapers, and I think he even wrote for a Swedish newspaper at one point.
He wrote for Orkesterjournalen, which is a Swedish jazz, actually the oldest jazz magazine in the world.
That's right. Yeah. And so I grew up, there was a lot of music around. He had, up at on the top floor of the house, he had a music room. That, of course, was the biggest room in the house. And there was thousands of records in there, and there was always, you know, a lot of, you know, Miles Davis, Charlie Parker, Ornette Coleman, John Coltrane, but there was also, you know, a little bit of Hendrix and the Doors and the Rolling Stones. So very apropos to that time period, you know, late 60s up to you know, the late 70s when we moved to America. But that room and my dad's friends and everything that he was doing up in that room that was coming out, seeping into the rest of the household, was obviously very inspirational and influential on setting a tone for me. In the wake of that was also artists that came through and writers and, you know, like Danish painters and so on. Yeah. So it was, there was a very rich upbringing in terms of culture.
Dexter Gordon, for instance, hang a lot at your house, a lot, I guess.
Yes, yeah. And Dexter Gordon's actually my godfather, if you can wrap your head around that. A lot of American jazz greats came and spent significant time in Denmark in the 50s and 60s. They were very much embraced, and I think also in the rest of Scandinavia and even in, you know, France and so on. Obviously, at that time in America, there was still a lot of problems for black musicians, and so they felt very welcome in Scandinavia, and really, you know, they were not judged, and everybody was colorblind, and people, I think, even loved the fact that they came from America and these gorgeous black men, and you hear the stories about how the Scandinavian blonde women embraced these great jazz musicians. So a lot of them ended up staying in Copenhagen. Dexter Gordon, Sonny Rollins spent significant time in Copenhagen. Ben Webster lived in Denmark and married a Danish lady. And so all these people, I mean, Denmark obviously and Copenhagen is very small, so all these people were kind of hanging in the same environment. And my dad spent a lot of time with all of them, and Dexter Gordon ended up being my godfather. My dad thought that would be cool. So there you go.
And I understand your father will be 90 this autumn.
He turns 90 October 4th. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. It's crazy.
And he's quite unusual character. I mean, being the best tennis player in Denmark and also the best jazz critic in Denmark.
If he was sitting here, he would probably deny both of those.
Yeah.
But growing up in a the tennis was the day job. Music and jazz was the passion. And so he traveled all over the world, and he was really interested in athletics and sports, and tennis was kind of the ticket into that. And his father was a significant tennis player in Denmark. His brother, Jørgen, was a highly ranked tennis player in Denmark. And at one point, actually, the Danish Davis Cup team was my father and his brother, and then their dad was the captain. So almost as good as Bjørn Borg and Ove Bengtsson and Lennart Bergeling. But so it was a Danish tennis playing family, and even my uncle's son Stein, who was my cousin, he became a Danish champion, and basically I'm the first one to fuck that up and to not carry on that Danish tradition of winning tennis championships. So I am the black sheep of the tennis playing part of the family.
I thought we could listen to the reason why you fucked that up. Well, your father brought you to a concert when you were 9.
That he did, yes.
And this band was playing.
Anybody know that song? Oh, that could work out very well for them. No, that's great.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like the definitive hard rock.
I'd planned to
intro.
choose a lesser-known track from Made in Japan, the Purpose live album.
Right.
But then you can't resist it when you hear it.
You can't resist it. And also, I think what that solidifies right there is that the great thing to me about, of many things, but one of the greatest things about Deep Purple was that whenever they played live, they always changed it up. And so you can hear Richie Blackmore, the guitar player, is playing the riff a little different and kind of having fun with it. And if you know these songs, all the studio versions of these songs were 3 or 4 minutes long, and then the live versions were 10, 15 minute long, depending on what mood they were in that night and how long they improvised the guitar solos and the keyboard solos. And that kind of impulsivity and I think momentary energy was a great thing about that particular time, and I think is sometimes sadly missed today.
We can talk more about that. You have also adopted that with Metallica, always changing things all the time with the live format.
We do our best, yes.
Yeah. but this album was probably the most well-known live album ever in rock music. Was released in December 1972, and I think you saw them early in 1973 in Denmark.
Yeah, they played. It was February of 1973.
Can you describe that experience? You went there with your father and you were 9.
Yes.
What did you think when you saw Deep Purple?
I thought, wow, that's really big and really loud, and what a racket and what a spectacle. The main thing I remember is, you know, Rich, the guitar player, I didn't even know his name, was sort of throwing his guitar around and, you know, playing it up against the PA speakers and all this stuff. And it was just really loud, and it felt like otherworldly. I'd never experienced anything like that. And, you know, that was really the beginning of it. The next day I went down to the local record store, Fona, in Hillerød. And I asked for whatever Deep Purple records they had at the time, and he gave me Fireball. And that was the first full-length album that I had.
Did you want, because I guess you had the plans of being a tennis player maybe, what made you decide to play drums?
Well, plans, growing up in a tennis playing family, I don't know if the word planning, it's sort of like what you're born into. And so I think you embrace what you know. And so at that time, I think I just expected of myself to follow in the path of the rest of the family members. But music, rock music, became my escape away from all that, and became just where I felt really comfortable. It was a great place to go and, I don't know, hide, hover, hang out. I played a little guitar for a couple of years, but for some reason, you know, the older I got, I started air drumming, and you know, we would put a band together down in the basement where I had all my records, and we would get tennis rackets and cardboard boxes, and we had a foosball game. So the foosball game would be the keyboards, the cardboard boxes would be the drums, a couple tennis rackets for guitar and bass, and then we had a broom would be the mic stand. But I always ended up being the guy on the cardboard boxes with the paint stirrers as drumsticks, and then we turned the old style radiators up to full blast, and then we, dare I say, took our shirts off at 11 years old, and then we started sweating and thinking that we were Deep Purple, the Sweet or Slate or Status Quo, and that was a very transformative couple of years. And when I wanted to graduate that to a real instrument, I asked my grandmother for a drum kit when I was around 14. And then the same thing continued. I never played in a band or anything in Denmark. I just sat around and imagined I was Ian Pace or John Coughlin, which was the drummer from Status Quo, and sat there and played along to those records. And again, at that time, tennis was still the main thing, but that music was kind of the escape.
And then your family moved to California?
Yes.
Yeah.
My dad was sitting here. He would say that I was the reason that we moved to California. I don't quite remember it like that, but I thought we all moved because he was playing a lot of tennis in America. But he would say that we moved to California so I could pursue this imaginative tennis career.
And there in California, we can talk more about that. You met a guy, James, and you created something that sort of changed rock music, and it's
and now I'm sitting here.
And it's the reason you're sitting here.
That was the short version of the story.
Yeah. but before we talk about it, we can just listen. This is a track from the very first demo cassette you made, and also the opening track on the first proper album. This is
that
called
Hit the Lights?
Yes,
okay.
It is Hit the Lights.
All right then. That was actually how Deep Purple used to start their concerts. They would come out and do that exactly. So the apple doesn't fall far from the tree here, as you can see.
Got the man like this, with a buzz of screaming.
That's what it sounds like when four boys who haven't quite hit puberty yet play rock music. But it's got good energy and youthful enthusiasm.
I mean, when you still hear this is insane. I mean, the energy, the noise you make, the world hasn't heard anything like this.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I don't know quite what to make of that 37 years later, but at that time, it was what we wanted to do. And you know, I think for us, the main thing with music was the energy and just the sort of the momentary like enthusiasm and just pushing the limits and trying to combine a bunch of different musical influences, and that's what came out of that. Yeah. But yeah, that was the first song that we wrote together, James and I, and it was the first song on the album, the first album, and we still play that occasionally.
Can you tell us a little bit about James, the singer and guitarist for Metallica? You and James has been sort of the dynamo from the very start to this day. How did you meet him? You're very different as persons. Can you describe the first meeting with James?
So we moved to Los Angeles, to Newport Beach, a suburb down in the south, and I was going to play tennis on the local high school team there. There was a Australian tennis player named Roy Emerson, who was close with my dad, and he had a son named Anthony Emerson, and he was the star tennis player at Corona Del Mar High School. And I was going to come in and be the number 2 player at Corona Del Mar High School. In Denmark at that time, I was kind of ranked in the top 10, you know, in the country and blah, blah, blah. And I was going to come to Newport Beach and be with Anthony Emerson on this tennis team. Except the problem was that when I tried out for the high school team, I wasn't one of the 7 best players in the school, and I wasn't even one of the 7 best players on the street I lived on, I think. So literally, in like one day, the whole tennis dream just crashed and burned hard, and music was waiting in the wings to take over. There was a 7-Eleven. 7-Eleven had a local classified ads newspaper called The Recycler, or it was available at all 7-Elevens, and you could buy and sell cars and lawnmowers and kitchen appliances or whatever. And in the very back, there was a small section about musicians looking for bands and bands looking for musicians. So I put in an ad saying, drummer looking for other heavy metal, you know, fans or whatever to start band, influences Diamond Head, Angel Witch, Tigers of Pantang, and Venom or something. And I would get all these calls from these guys saying, you know, I'm into heavy metal, I like Styx, and I like Kansas, and I like Van Halen or whatever, and who's Diamond Head? Then we would sort of have that conversation, and then I went and tried to play music with a bunch of these people, and none of it worked out. And then one day, there was a call from a guy named Hugh Tanner, who said if he could bring a friend of his along, and we met up and played music for an afternoon. And the guy that he brought along was James Hetfield. Very shy, super introverted, could barely look you in the eye, barely have a conversation. But there was some connection with him as we were playing. And even though nothing happened that day, I ended up being kind of frustrated with the whole thing. And now it was June of 1981, so I went back and spent the summer in Europe and hung out, spent some time in England with Diamond Head and Motorhead and so on. But when I came back to America in October of that year, I called up that James Hetfield guy again, because there was just a vibe, a connection. And I said if he wanted to get together and see if there was the possibility of something, and we hooked up, and 37 years later, I'm sitting here. So that was really it. Yeah. He was, at that time, I came from, like we talked about, a cultured European upbringing. Was an only child, very close to my parents. My parents were my best friends at the time, and he was the exact opposite, the classic American rebellious sort of, you know, fuck my parents, fuck society, fuck the man, you know, that whole thing. And
he grew up in a very religious family, and his father disappeared quite early.
Yes, I think his father took off not exactly sure when, but I know he was very disconnected from his father, and he was raised by his mother, who then got cancer when he was 14 or 15, and because of the particular Christianity that they believed in, they were not allowed to seek medical help. So basically, I think over the course of a year and a half, he watched his mother pass away right in front of his eyes. So that obviously had a significant impact on him. I met him, I think about a year after that. Maybe he was 17 or 18. Painfully shy, awkward. But we connected over music, and we sat up in my room in Newport Beach and listened to, like I said, Tigers Pantang and Girls' School and Saxon and Angel Witch and all these things, and he loved all that stuff. He grew up more on American Aerosmith and Ted Nugent and that kind of stuff. But we found a common language and a common thing that we could both feel connected to and identify with, and we started playing songs together. You know, most of the songs we started with were covers of new wave of British heavy metal songs that were very off the radar, because we wanted to start playing concerts right away. Yeah. So we figured if we learned a set, you know, a lot of bands in the bars and the clubs at that time were playing Kiss songs and Judas Priest songs or whatever. So we figured we would play some covers, but not songs that people knew. Yeah. And then we would take our time and start writing our own songs later.
We can actually listen to one of the songs which I think you played at that time. This is one of the British bands you've been talking about. Yeah. This is from their first album from 1980.
Okay.
One of your influences.
Now you know where we get the long intros from. It's never quite ever felt that long before.
That was Am I Evil by Diamond Head.
Yes.
Yeah. That was one of those British bands you listen to, where very few people in America listen to those bands. And this new wave of heavy metal, they were quite influenced by punk, who sort of raised the tempo.
Yeah, it's so the brief history here. So punk music was the answer to, you know, the what they call the dinosaur rock, the Led Zeppelins and the Queens, and all this larger than life imagery, and these virtuoso musicians who were playing all this crazy stuff that was incredibly great and awesome, but also for a lot of people seemed quite bombastic and out of reach. And so when punk music started, it was sort of taking back to the streets and 3 chords and, you know, breaking it down to just energy and attitude and keeping it simple. And so in 1979, the hard rock version of that, again, sort of leather jackets and bringing the hard rock back to the streets and more about the energy and the attitude than the ability, with bands like Iron Maiden and Saxon and Angel Witch, Diamond Head, Tigers of Pantang, Venom, the list goes on. You know, so, you know, and I really connected to that. I mean, for as much as Deep Purple was great and Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath and all that, there was still something very big and I guess bombastic is a good word, you know, and so these bands that played these 2-3 minute songs that had the energy, like Motorhead, that had the energy of punk music, but a little more based in riffs and a little bit more, you know, maybe a little bit more finesse or whatever, and the leather jackets rather than the you know, the studs and all the you know, the stuff of the punk movement. It was just sort of like the newer heavy metal. And so that was really an awakening thing for me, and James and I used that as our primary influence when we started writing songs, and especially this band, Diamond Head. They have probably the most to answer for in terms of directly inspiring the sound of Metallica.
When you play those early gigs, you were sort of trying to fit in the music scene in Los Angeles.
I'm still trying to fit in.
Yeah, but those people, they didn't understand you at all. They saw you as sort of misfits in Iron Maiden T-shirts. They didn't connect.
But
really.
it's also because of what was going on in LA at the time. Bands like Motley Crue and Rat and Steeler and whatever else they were all called, Quiet Riot. No disrespect to them, of course, but that was what was going on in the clubs in LA and Hollywood specifically, which was very much about the imagery and the visuals and the aesthetics and how you looked and all that, how you sort of came across on stage. And our thing was just Motorhead and Iron Maiden T-shirts and just get up there, and we didn't care about the visuals at all and just wanted to connect to the audience through the music. And at that time, that didn't really, there was no real place for that in Los Angeles. So we started playing shows up in San Francisco later that year, and in San Francisco there was much more of a welcoming atmosphere for that kind of music that was a little edgier and more on left field.
When you wrote those songs, did you ever talk about what you express in the songs? There was so much anger coming out. Did you just play, or did you ever sit down and talk about what you wanted to create?
We didn't talk about much other than what to get at the liquor store at the time. But, you know, we felt very disenfranchised and felt very alienated. And at that time, you know, that was what connected us to each other. So we found strength in the rest of the misfits that didn't belong to, we didn't belong to the clubs up in Hollywood. We didn't belong to the cool kids groups in schools or whatever. You know, we just lived on the outer fringes of all that, and we connected to each other through this music. But at that time, when you're 19 years old, I mean, you don't really have conversations about the depth of any of this type of stuff. You just find a kind of an unspoken language in the music, and through feeling like a strength in numbers, you know, like a gang mentality, you know. So it wasn't until, you know, 20, 30 years later when we ended up having conversations. Some of it ended up in a movie a few of you may have seen, but there was a couple decades there where we didn't go very deep. I'm sure some of you can relate to that.
I know Joy Division, another post-punk British band, they said in the interviews they didn't hear what Ian Curtis was singing because they couldn't hear him in the rehearsal space. So it was a surprise for them when they listened to the record. Okay, this is quite deep.
I don't know what to do with that.
No.
But I mean, you know, the lyrics that James started writing very early on were initially, we would sit around and just write sort of, it's going to say something else, but we were just write sort of, you know, just standard rock lyrics. And then a year or two later, we started talking more about things that, you know, situations you would find yourself in, fears, being caught in you know, at the, you know, in ways that you couldn't control, in situations you couldn't control, and started kind of trying to, very early on, okay, we did talk obviously a little, we talked about how we did not want to end up covering the topics of a lot of the other metal bands, like the sword and the sorcery and all the, you know, demonic stuff did not appeal to us at all. We weren't interested in the sort of mythology and all that kind of stuff, you know. And so we ended up expressing through the lyrics more about just being trapped in situations and what would happen if this was going on and that was going on, dealing with manipulation and control and things like capital punishment and so on, but not so much like dealing with the graphic elements or describing the situations, but more trying to get into, if you were caught in these types of situations, what will your thoughts and your actions and your feelings be?
I think that manipulation and control, I think that's the perfect introduction to the next song.
Okay then. Why does it always turn down before you hit the button?
Because I have a secret code word with the technician up there.
The secret code,
yes.
okay.
So
now remember I told you about long intros, right? So
yeah.
That intro was not quite as long as the Diamond Head one, but now you see where we get it from, right?
I guess everyone knows this is Master of Puppets, the title track of your album.
James Hetfield is now officially out of puberty.
Yeah. but this is so intense. When you hear you playing this live, there's always this incredible feeling from the audience. I mean, it's probably your most loved song live.
You know what? It actually is. Very good. Mm-hmm. We did a couple of, 4 or 5 years ago, we did a tour around much of the world called By Request. And we had all the fans, if you bought a ticket, you could vote for the set list. And so we had, for every show, we had the running tally. And in every single city, Master of Puppets was the #1 song voted by the fans for inclusion in the set list. So it is definitely a fan favorite and a live favorite.
And I know a lot of people, young people especially, with this quite tough growing up. You feel alienated, you have a lot of feelings you can't express. But it seems like your concert is sort of a place to release all those emotions, all that anger. And you can really feel it in the audience, that it goes both ways from you and the audience. How does it feel being on stage, playing a song like that and getting the reaction from the audience?
Well, I mean, in its best moments, when we're on stage and the four of us really connect with each other, and when the four of us really connect with the audience, those are the moments that you live for. That's this undescribable feeling of losing yourself in music, where thought dissipates and music becomes this physical thing. It doesn't happen always, and if I said to you that happens at every concert for 2 hours, then I would be lying to you. But it happens often enough to still warrant doing it, and it's an incredible thing when you can connect with an audience, whether it's a small audience or a big audience or insane audience. It doesn't really matter, but when you feel that separation between the band and the audience erodes or disappears, and you just sort of become one, those are the great moments. You know, being on stage and playing these songs is this peculiar mix of, like, what's the next part? Wait a minute, that light in the lighting rig seems off tonight, and what happened to something else, and what's going on over in that corner, and hey, look, my friend's over there, you know, and wow, I shouldn't have eaten that cheeseburger yesterday, or whatever. I mean, there's such a mix of emotions that are always going on, you know, when you're up on stage. But like I said, when thought somewhere between occasionally and often disappears, and it just becomes about this musical thing, it's amazing, and it still does happen.
This song is quite a good example of sort of the Metallica sound. What is the Metallica sound? Can you help us break down that? What are we actually hearing in songs like this?
Those are always the toughest questions for me. I mean, whatever you do, and however much you try to intellectualize it and describe it, philosophize it, whatever, you always have to put in, to me, like an X factor. There's just something that happens when the four of us play music together, or when James plays a riff and I try to find the pocket for it behind him, or whatever. There's something that happens, and that's a fortunate thing. Sometimes I get even weary of trying to over-intellectualize it or to even answer that question, because it feels like sometimes things should just be left to their own devices. And since you're the journalist, maybe you can answer it better. And you know, obviously, we are fortunate to travel the world and get asked these questions, and everybody's got a different answer. And I think that that's the beauty of music. And if I even may be pompous and say the beauty of art, is that when it really connects with people, it is something that everybody has an individual relationship to and an individual experience with. And I think, you know, when I get lost in a painting, or if I get lost in a film, or if I get lost in a piece of literature or whatever, having the creator of that or the author of that sit and tell me exactly what it means and what he meant and how I'm supposed to interpret it and all that, that loses something. So to me, and I know especially James is weary of getting into talking too much about his lyrics and wants people to just establish their own relationship with the lyrics and so on. And I feel, you know, I like to go there too, that I think ultimately, what's a Metallica fan? What's a Metallica piece of music? You know, everybody's got a different answer to that. And I think if you lined, you know, 20 people up over there that were all Metallica fans, you'd get, you know, people from 10, 11, 12 years old all the way up to 50, 60. Some people have been with us for 35 years. Some people are just experiencing Metallica for the first time. And the diehards and the people that are occasional fans and people that appreciate the lyrics, of people that appreciate the energy, or whatever it is. But everybody's got a different relationship to the music and to the band and to the bigger picture. And I think that it's always best if it's left at that.
Yeah. But I think one thing that is different in Metallica from other bands is the drums. I mean, the drums usually are in the background, the drummer usually is in the background, but on stage you are very in front of it, and also when
It's
you
pretty fucking lonely back there, honestly.
But also when you listen to the music, you have a totally unique way of playing. I mean, the drums isn't in the background. You're playing a very unique way of playing drums, and you sort of lead the music. Can you tell us a little bit about that, how you have become the drummer you are, and what you think is the purpose of drums in music?
Well, thank you for that. I mean, there's a couple different things in that. You know, first of all, obviously, 35 years later, there's been different phases to Metallica and musical phases, and so I think at different times, the drums have been pushed into the forefront more than at other times where I felt that the riffs and what was going on overall, the drums served a better purpose of kind of laying back. To me, it's always about the song. And to me, I love being in a band. I love writing songs. I love making records, and I love the creative process. And I've said this many times, drums and drumming is the vehicle that facilitates that for me. I guess consider myself a member of Metallica first and enjoy writing songs and so on. When I think about like drums, it's like drums is my ticket into that, in the same way that Kurt's guitar is his, so that's what each of us bring. But to me, drums as an instrument is not that interesting by itself. It really starts working for me in a collective, in a group, in a gang. And so when James Hetfield plays a guitar riff, I want to find the pocket. I want to put the beat down. Sometimes I play a drum pattern or a drum riff or whatever, and then James starts playing something along to that. So it works both ways, and it has worked over the course of all these records in 35 years. A lot, give and take and back and forth and so on. And James also is a great drummer and will sometimes suggest different drum patterns or try this or, whatever, and vice versa. He's a
drummer as well, and you are a guitarist as well.
I think that may be slightly pushing it, but I can communicate through him enough on a guitar neck, or say, the bend, do that bend twice instead of just doing it once, or we have strange little words for everything, but do that, play that, instead of doing 3 and 1, do 2 and 2, and all of a sudden that changes like the way you hear the riff. And so I can communicate guitar riffs and that type of stuff through him, and he's fortunately, and again, it's a big part of the reason we're sitting here, is he's fortunately as open to that from me as I am with him talking about drum parts or whatever. So we just have a language and a way that we communicate that works for us. But going back to what you talked about before, I mean, you have to put the X factor and some, I don't know how cosmic you want to get, but the aligning of the stars or the universal energy around us or whatever as part of the way that all this works. What was the question again?
I don't even remember the question, but I think you answered it brilliantly.
Well,
I think
you.
We could listen to a track that really...
Oh, we were talking about drums.
Yes, drums.
Drums,
but I
My least favorite topic.
But we can listen to a track that really shows your strength as songwriters.
Okay.
So here's the next one.
Ooh. intros get shorter and shorter as we go along.
But this is really a classic, timeless rock song.
Well, thank you.
And this album sort of took you from being one of the biggest metal bands in the world, maybe the biggest, to one of the biggest rock bands in the world. What sort of happened in when making the Black Album? What created the Black Album?
Well, Cliff and I went under the bleachers in Toronto.
Cliff is your manager.
Cliff is my manager,
yeah,
right
yeah,
there.
Yeah.
And it was in Toronto, right? We were playing with Aerosmith. It was the summer of 1990, and it was the very end of the Justice cycle. And James was there too, right? It was James, me, and you, and we went under the bleachers at the CNE in Toronto in the summer of 1990, and we had finished the Justice cycle, and we sat and told Cliff that we felt that we had pushed the progressive side of Metallica. The last song on the Injustice for All album was a song called Dyer's Eve, which is 5 minutes of basically what we jokingly call like math metal,
Yeah.
where it's like
you're changing the tempo all the time, and it's very long songs.
All,
yeah,
you know,
yeah.
and so we found as we were going along on that tour, as the audiences became bigger and bigger, that some of the crazier 10-minute progressive songs felt like they were connecting less and less with the audience. And we felt that we had, from a creative point of view, pushed, where do you go after Dyer's Eve? So it's like, you've reached the end of that. There's nothing beyond that. So we decided that we were going to try, to take, like, we creatively wanted to take a turn, and so we figured that, simplicity and trying to be a little more cohesive, right? Shorter intros, thank you. And, we needed to do something else. And we did. And then we made the Black Album with Bob Rock, and then all of that happened. And, but it just, we felt like we were on a creative journey that and we've always felt like we've been on a creative journey that always needs to be reinvigorated, reinvented, and I think we as people have a fear of repetition, or fear of being sort of stuck, and maybe even to the point where you could argue that we fight it too much. I think we may have made a couple turns at some point that were almost too much, just because we don't want to be fucking trapped in what people want from us, what the community expects from us, and we are so fiercely independent and autonomous, and nobody's going to hold us back, and we're just going to keep changing it up all the time. But this record really was, I think, a reflection on. I think if you look at the first 4 records, Kill 'Em All, Ride the Lightning, Master of Puppets, and Justice, there was a natural progressive growth and evolution that just came to an end point at the end of the Justice for All album, and the only place forward other than repeating yourself or getting stuck in that moment was to do something completely different, and that's what we did for the next couple of years.
You seem to have those. You seem to talk all the time. What should Metallica be?
I seem to talk all the time. Well, thank you. Okay, nobody's ever said that before. Okay.
No, but when you listen to Metallica, you really hear that you have evolved all the time, and you sort of, as you told us now, that you have a discussion on what should we be. And in your case, there's a unique document of this. The documentary is some kind of monster you did. And I think it's so brave you did that documentary, because all bands in the world have this kind of discussion. Well, what should it be? Maybe we're breaking up, we don't agree on anything. But you did that documentary, and you agreed to release it. I think 99 of 100 bands would have sort of deleted that documentary.
Thank you. Delete that, yeah.
But I think it's one of the best documentaries I ever seen, actually, because you learn so much how to deal with people. What made you agree to show the documentary?
Well, first of all, as you probably have figured out, it didn't start out that way.
No.
So the idea was we were making another record, and the idea was to document it. Again, the idea was to do some, what was it, info, like we're going to document the making of this record. And then in America at that time, there was these late night, from 1 to 3 in the morning, you could buy, Ginsu knives and weird plastic contraptions for your kitchen or whatever that they would sell over these, like, for lack of a better word, infomercials. And we figured maybe if we documented the making of this record, that one way we could share this in a, at that time, changing music world or record company world or whatever, business world, I hate using that word, but things were shifting. So we figured maybe if we film this, we can, maybe there's a place for this on late night television between, Ginsu knives and the rest of it. And so these filmmakers, Joe Berlinger and Busanowski, who we had a relationship with from the Paradise Lost series, where we had contributed our music, came and started documenting the making of this record. And then all hell broke loose and the whole thing just fell to pieces. And the cameras kept rolling through all that. And they asked if they could keep filming this meltdown of this rock and roll band, and we were probably too flustered or not focused enough to even totally understand what we said yes to, but they just kept filming. And a year or two later, they came and said, we think there's a movie here that has a dramatic arc to it. The best documentaries have, whatever the particular subject is, if there's an arc and something there that people can relate to on a wider scale, it usually works because of the human condition. And so, Some Kind of Monster is not really about a rock and roll band. It's about relationships, and it's about how people in a particular situation connect to each other. And a lot of people could identify with the elements in the movie and really felt something from watching this film. I still, 15, 20 years later, don't really quite know what to make of the whole thing, but I trusted Bruce, I trusted Joe, the filmmakers, I trusted our advisors, and I'm always up for a dare. Sometimes too up for a dare, but I'm always interested in seeing what happens if you go into an unexplored creative territory. And then this movie became this sort of seminal rock film. And whenever I watch it or hear about it, I have this ability to sort of compartmentalize. That's not really me. I third person it, as I call it, but I know what it meant to people.
And the interesting thing is it really worked, that process you went through in the documentary, because after that, during the last 15 years, you become bigger and more popular than ever as a live band. You sell out everywhere, and you seem to be more harmony between you
on the
as
other,
well. Yeah.
It took a couple years for all the pieces to settle, and it was a little rough finding our feet on the subsequent tour, the St. Anger tour in 03 and 04, I believe. But somehow when we went back to the studio again in 05, we took a year off. That's actually the last time we took a whole year away from Metallica. It's been 14 years since we stepped away. When we came back from that year off in late 05, somehow there was a tranquility and something in the band, like everything had settled, and we started making the next record, which became Death Magnetic, and that's been I guess about 12 years now, and we've hands down had the best 12 years of our career. And the last record we made, Hardwired to Self-Destruct, from a couple years ago, sort of in some perverse way has become our most successful record in 25 years. And like you're saying, we're enjoying forgetting about the numbers and forgetting about the success and all that, but we're enjoying a harmony. It sounds a little cheesy, but
Yeah,
where
but
we're
you-
enjoying a tranquility and a harmony
Yeah.
and an effortlessness in, and we do put a lot of time and resources into working on the personal and the practical. The creative seems to be easier right now than it's been for a long time, but we spend a lot of our resources and our energy on just functioning.
Yeah.
But we finally found some balances. We only play 50 shows a year. We only play them in 2-week increments. We have some pretty
And
strict
you never
rules of
play 2 shows in a row?
we don't play 2 shows, and that's something we started last year. But we found these balances that seem to make it possible for us to go along in a healthy and in a way that's conducive to sort of an internal harmony, and it makes it all function somehow.
And maybe a little bit, you're going back to your roots, you almost behave like a jazz band on stage in that way, that you never play the same set twice, which is very unusual in this day and age with cameras and movies and everything. And the way you're connecting us, the 4 of you, with Robert has become an essential part of the band.
Absolutely.
And you improvise a lot.
Well, we have to for ourselves. I mean, we know, what happens when you're 35 years into anything. I mean, if you really start understanding and knowing your own boundaries and your own dynamics, and we have to play a different set every night. Again, sort of out of fear of ending up on autopilot. We have to keep mixing it up for ourselves, and we have to, when we play indoors, it affords us the opportunity to play. We've played for about 25 years now. When we play indoors, we always play some version in the round because it gets us closer to a bigger part of the audience, and there's more energy that can be shared when you have 4 front rows and you're playing in the middle rather than at one end. So all these little things that you learn along the way to just make yourself the best that you can be. And I think we have an honest respect for the physical limits of what our battered bodies can reasonably sustain in our early 50s. And obviously we understand how important the element of physicality is to what we do. And so we do everything that we can to treat that with the respect it deserves in terms of, eating healthy, living somewhat healthily, working out and being respectful to that whole side of it and finding the right balances.
I think we have time to listen to a track by one of your favorite groups from a different genre, a band that didn't do some kind of monster therapy session, but should have.
Oh, okay.
This is, I think you will know this song.
I do know the song. Well, there you go. The shortest intro of the evening.
Yes, this is Oasis Supersonic.
Yes.
Why do you think this is a great track?
It's probably been the musical soundtrack to the last 20 years of my life. When I flew over here 2 days ago, I sat with my iPod Classic and listened to Oasis and Arctic Monkeys. Nothing changes around here much. There's something about this particular period in English music. I've always been attracted to bands that had attitude and...
I think just attitude is sort of a key word. I think they were sort of masters of attitude, and you are also that.
Yeah, I mean, but even, if you talk about, I don't know, Jim Morrison, if you talk about, Bon Scott or Axl Rose or, you know, some of these, you know, to me, music, you know, has been dangerous, was dangerous, should be dangerous. There should be a you know, an unpredictability element to it. When I think about, again, like we talk about Deep Purple at their finest, depending on what mood Ritchie Blackmore was in, that would dictate how long the solo in Child in Time was. If he was in a shitty mood, it'd be 2 minutes. If he was in a great mood, it'd be 12 minutes. So that kind of thing seems so lost nowadays. And maybe it's a way for me to, you know, if we're supposed to go on stage at 9:15, we're usually on by 9:20. It's not like, you know, it's, you know, whatever. And that's just an example. But we've always somewhat showed up on time. We've always tried to, you know, play along and do our thing. And I guess inside me, there's always been a little bit of an attraction to the dangerous element that I guess I feel like I occasionally sort of miss both in today's music and occasionally Metallica also. So I've always been attracted to bands that really wore that on their sleeves and were not, didn't hold it back, if you know what I mean. And so musically, you know, obviously when you hear that, and 30 minutes ago I talked about the Sweet Slade and Status Quo. I mean, this is obviously a direct descendant of the kind of British pop music that I grew up on. And so I think there's a natural and easily explainable and understood thread to that. And Oasis and a lot of the other bands like the Arctic Monkeys and a lot of, it's just always appealed to me. And to me, you know, music's just music. It, you know, I'm in a heavy metal band, so I'm supposed to listen to heavy metal. I mean, I just fucking hate all that kind of stuff. And all of us in Metallica have very wide musical palettes and very wide musical, you know, our iPods go deep and into many, many different genres: jazz, blues, classical, hip hop, reggae, all kinds of crazy stuff. And that's really, to me, music. There's only two categories of music. There's great music and less great music. Other than that, you don't need to define it. Thank you very much.
And speaking of great music, you are now receiving a prize, which is previous laureates are musicians your father played at home, like Sonny Rollins, Dizzy
Amazing.
Ray Charles, and you have
Yes.
Joni Mitchell and Björk.
Stop.
Yes.
Stop. I'm going to leave.
Just the very last question. What does it mean to you now being in this company of musicians who have received the Polar Music Prize?
Remember 10 minutes ago I said, when you're up on stage, what do you think about? I think of many different things. So obviously, you know, my emotions go all over the place. I drink a lot of tea on a daily basis, so it always moves. But the first thoughts are obviously honored, humbled, just overwhelmed. But at the same time, when you start talking about Sonny Rollins and the rest of the people you're talking about, it's like, how the fuck did we get on that list? And it's something that I don't know if I struggle with it, but I still, 37 years later, as you get more clarity in your life and you open your eyes more and more to what goes on around you, I've always felt like an outsider, and I've always felt like I never quite belonged to whatever was going on, or even, you know, there was always something bigger, better, and I was always hovering outside of that. And I think honestly that I still feel that way a lot, that whatever success Metallica has afforded us, and I do believe that the four of us at our core somehow have managed to hold on to most of the elements of our personalities that have shaped, you know, who we are from way back, and it's still, you know, we kind of still feel like the dorky young kids that shouldn't really be at a party like this. It's, you know, like like Groucho Marx used to say, I don't want to go to a party that I'm invited to, or something like that. You know, so it's we still struggle a little bit with that. And I guess ultimately, if you do have to intellectualize it, I believe that maybe that attitude is what keeps us somewhat grounded and keeps us somewhat healthy in all this craziness as we try to figure out what's up, down, and sideways. But being here on day 2, yesterday was amazing, the dinner at the castle and just getting a chance to meet the whole group, and now here day 2 and tomorrow. It's such an amazing experience to be part of, and really, you know, one word we always use around Metallica is the word family. And when I think of the Polar Prize now, and especially after understanding more of it from being around since yesterday, the word family really comes to mind. This is a family here in Stockholm, and you know, starting with Stig and the kids, and that family that's taken this whole thing in 20x year something, and you know, it's just an amazing thing that I think as Metallica we certainly connected, because it's all about unity and collective and spirit and group and family. So we're very fortunate to be here and very happy to be here and very appreciative. And there you go.
Thank you very much for coming and doing this. So I'll just play as an outro music, a song by our Godfather.
You can't leave yet.
No, but we cannot leave. This is Next to Gordon, Lars Ulrich. Thank you very much.
Okay,
Thank you. Thank you.